The views, comments, and opinions of the following program do not necessarily reflect those of Morris Media Studios, MorrisMediaLive.com, or its affiliates. Listener discretion is advised.
Thank you, Lord, my God. Lord, I want to thank you today for what you have given me.
I want to thank you today for what you've given me.
I am what I am because of you, my Lord.
I'm what I am today because of you, my Lord.
Lord, I was born blind, but today I can see.
Lord, I was born blind, but today I can see.
My disabled brother can walk because of you.
My disabled brother can walk today. Because of your strength, because of your strength. Thank you, my Lord. Thank you, my Jesus.
Lord, you are the best. Nobody can match your strength.
Nobody can match.
You lifted me from nowhere.
You lifted me from
and made me what I am, oh Lord. You brought me joy. You made this world a better place for me.
You made this world
Thank you
a better place for
very
me.
much. Thank you, God. Thank you, Lord, my God. God, you are amazing. You are gracious. You are a God that never contradicts himself. God, you never cease to amaze me. You are the greatest of power, omnipotent, omnipresent. Indeed, you are God eternal, God the Almighty. You are too good to be true, too kind to be cruel, too wise to err, sovereign in good and bad times. You are the best, truly the best, best God.
Oh, thank you, my Jesus. You are the
Lord, you are the
best.
best. Nobody can match your strength.
Nobody can match.
You lifted me from nowhere
You lifted me
and made me what I am, oh Lord. You brought me joy. You made this world a better place for me. Thank you very much. Thank you, God. Thank you, Lord, my God. You brought me joy. You made this world a better place for me.
Beloved, we're coming to you live from South Los Angeles. What a joy it is to have you with us. This is Faith Without Borders. I'm your host, Pastor Calvin Sauls, and that was MZ, the People's Poet, straight out from South Africa, Mzwakhe Mbuli. Really honored to have him join us today for this local conversation. That means we're connecting locally and we're connecting globally. It is always good to have you here at Faith Without Borders. Our goal is, thought-provoking conversation that is solutions-oriented. And as always, we try to be at the intersection, of what's happening locally, nationally, and what's happening globally. And that's how we do it here. And today, our theme is when shift happens, global solidarity, unity, and intersectionality. When shift happens. That's a very interesting word, shift. I'm going to make sure that because of my South African accent that you hear that I am saying shift and not another word. However, if you look at the word shift and you take the F out of it, which for me stands for future, then we're going to be in a lot of other stuff because we live for the future and not for the past. That's, what faith is all about. It is future-oriented. It is about progression. It is about moving forward. And that's why I love that song that says, because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Yes, we have to face our yesterdays too, but we face our yesterdays in light of the fact that we have to face our tomorrows. That song by Mzwakhe Mbuli is a very, very powerful song because it grounds us into who God really is and who God truly is. We do have systems and schemes, both in the United States, in South Africa, and elsewhere, that seek to be God, play God, become God by, dehumanizing others, discriminating against others. And so that song is powerful for me because it just grounds us into not just who we are, but whose we are. And so as we are infected with and affected by supremacy of all kinds, but especially white supremacy, we want to ground ourselves in the fact that our strength comes from God, who seek to lift us up from whatever we are going through and wherever we may find ourselves. And right about now, in these tumultuous times, in these perilous times, in these momentous times, it is so essential that we ground ourselves into our humanity that is connected with our divinity. That is so important for us, because the challenges that we are facing, both COVID-19, that's the pandemic that has revealed health inequity, as well as the challenge of white supremacy that's being revealed around systemic racism and all other schemes. And we see this, of course, is happening all over the place and not just in the United States. Huge march yesterday in Paris. We've seen some more violence right here with us in Palmdale, where a young man was found hanging from a noose or rope in front of the City Hall of Palmdale, California. In Atlanta, Georgia, another fatal shooting of a black man who was asleep in the driveway. So instead of calling 911 or calling the ambulance, they chose to call the police. So that police chief now is gone because of the mayor of Atlanta taking a stand around that. Lots happening in Seattle, in Minneapolis. And so we see all of this going on as well as in South Africa. And that's why today we wanted to bring these two contexts together. And we're doing it with none other than Mzwakhe Mbuli, who just released a new poem entitled Racism is Barbarism. And so we're going to watch that video and hear this man's voice. Growing up in South Africa, when we felt we were voiceless, he was our voice for liberation and for freedom. When we felt powerless, he was the one that provided power for us by how he used words in transformative and liberative ways. He is the people's poet. We call him MZ, and I'm so honored he has joined us. So we're going to start off right now once again to welcome his voice to and for all of you as he recites this poem that he just released and the video entitled Racism is Barbarism. Here's Mzwakhe MZ Mbuli.
Racism is barbarism. Barbarism by barbaric baboons. There is no DNA for racism. There are no genes for racism. No baby is born a racist. Racism is a mental disease, a brain virus, a cancer of the mind that runs deep from bone to marrow. Racists have gone berserk. They are enemies of peace and liberty. Racists are morally bankrupt. They are vicious human vipers, vicious human vampires, worse than animals. Human slaughter is not an act of heroism. We are made in God's image. Thou shalt not kill. Racists are trapped in the twilight of the past. They are heartless, cruel, and doomed. Racists spit on the graves of martyrs. They spit on the graves of freedom fighters. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Philip Randolph, Marcus Garvey, Angela Davis, Erika Huggins, Stokely Carmichael, Rosa Parks, African American Pride, Arthur Ashe, Harry Belafonte, Denzel Washington, Oprah Winfrey, Reverend Jesse Jackson, Quincy Jones, fallen beloved Matthias, fallen beloved Matthias, Michael Jackson, Nelson Mandela, Julius Nyerere, Kwame Nkrumah, W. Du Bois, Stephen Bantu Biko, Robert Sobukwe, Winnie Madikizela Mandela. Racists are psychopaths, sociopaths. Their reasoning is terminally ill. Racists belong to a bottomless pit. Beware of criminals in police uniform, hooligans in police uniform. The people's patience is not endless. Black lives matter. Victims of police brutality. I speak of Ahmaud Aubrey, Rodney King, Eric Donner, Anton Rose, Freddie Gray, Baltimore, Michael Brown, Lunkwan, McDonald's, Oscar Grant, Sean Bell, Trevor Martin, Philando Castile, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. George Floyd. Let us declare war against racism. Racism must fall. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
There he is, Mzwakhe, the people's poet Mbuli, is a household name who captured audiences worldwide, affectionately known as MZ, or Voice of Reason. You've just heard his uncompromising lyrics. He has influenced folk across South Africa and the continent and indeed the world. And during the dark days of apartheid, he was declared an enemy of apartheid. He has, survived several, assassination attempts, but he continued to remain steadfast and strong with that voice still going. It is so glad, it's an honor for us to welcome to Faith Without Borders the people's poet Mzwakhe Mbuli, joining us right before midnight from South Africa. Mzwakhe, are you there? Comrade.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure, my comrade brother Kelvin Sauls. I'm humbled. Truly, I'm humbled.
Yes.
By this opportunity. Yeah.
Listen, man, we are honored, and I want to give a shout out to Tony Sauls, my younger brother, who is a partner of mine. We work together on so many different, projects around racial justice and racial equity. He was the one that reminded me, of what you just released, and so I'm glad we were able to connect. And here we are. And I know it's winter there. I can see it, man. That beautiful scarf that you have around your neck looks beautiful. It's representative of who we are as a people. Thank you for that poem, man. That was just a powerful spoken word, and just bringing us into the intersection of what has happened in Southern Africa, South Africa in particular, but also what's happening right now in North America. This continues to take place. What inspired you, to write that poem, connecting the Black Lives Matter movement, of course, here in the United States, with the movement for Black lives and liberation that still continues, of course, in South Africa?
Brother Kelvin, we are one. We belong to the same Father God.
Yeah.
The first song was about a God that never contradicts himself, a covenant-keeping God. There is no one above God. I always say I fear no one but God. And the God of your president is the God of Jesus Christ. Is Alpha, is Omega, centuries do not age our God. Kingdom rise and fall. Be it Adolf Hitler or Benito Mussolini, any tyrant any person who's arrogant or prepared to insult the intelligence of God or people made in God's image, that person won't go unpunished. It's an injury to one is an injury to all.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What happens in one place affects us all. As I said, we are one. I belong to the human race. Mm-hmm. Where during our apartheid days, when days were dark, when things were tough in South Africa, ruled by a system declared crime against humanity, apartheid regime, I know that there were anti-apartheid movements around the world, but in the States in particular, there was a movement called Artists United Against Apartheid.
Yes, yes.
You can mention a lot of people, from Reverend Jesse Jackson. There were movements, our people were scattered all over the world. They were called exiles. They were based in the States. They got so much support. I know it's unfortunate that when I juxtapose that, there were people like Ronald Reagan administration, Margaret Thatcher, that were supportive of the apartheid regime, a regime that, I repeat, that was regarded as crime against humanity, a regime that committed so many atrocities, and a regime that was a victim of isolation, cultural boycott. You know, you can name a mention of people who were there for us, even the World Council of Churches, Bishop Tutu, quite a number of men of the cloth in the States were supportive of our cause. Now, how can one fold his arms or his hands when one would watch on television the brutal murder of, be it Michael Brown? The list is endless. I remember it started in 1982 when Rodney King was killed in Los Angeles in full view of us watching television. So history repeats itself. It is unfortunate. But these are people made in God's image. I'm happy to talk of faith beyond borders, of faith without borders. These human beings, sacred soul, be it George Floyd, they are made in God's image. Demons have no capacity to love. My Bible says, thou shalt not kill. You should instead love one another, love thy neighbors, thyself. It cannot be accepted a situation that our black African American brothers continue to be killed like animals, as it happens from time to time. Right. It's not acceptable. It can't be. It cannot be. So these monsters, these human animals who masquerade as human beings, cannot just be left unchallenged. I'm glad there is now a global, winds of change. There is a global anger against racism because this is cancer of the brain damage, virus of the brain. It cannot be accepted. Now, how long, Pastor Kelvin Sauls, how long? I mean, America was built on genocides of the indigenous American Indians. I mean, as though that was not enough, these guys went now to invade Africa. And according to Harvard University, Oxford University, Cambridge, the figures is estimated 80 million African Americans that were murdered, that were killed en route to build America today. And I cannot forget the balkanization of Africa in Germany, von Bismarck, when every country sliced Africa like a loaf of bread. Libya, Italy will take Libya, Britain will take Kenya, South Africa, Germans would take Namibia, France will take Mali, and Portugal will take Mozambique, Angola. And these were genocides. Right. So people were massacred, people were murdered. So our land, Africa, was not just taken easily on a silver platter. It was blood. Yeah. They continue to do exactly that, as though that is not enough. We are dealing with people, nations who have no conscience, no guilt, no remorse. They continue. instead of being remorseful of the crimes of against humanity, the blood that was spilled over the years, the genocides of the Herero people in Namibia, what happened in the Mau Mau people in Kenya. These people continue to kill our African brothers in the streets of America. It's not acceptable. I'm glad the winds of change are blowing. No more turning back. Things have changed now. I don't think Donald Trump is able to sleep peacefully. I'm sure unless he can use tablets. But it's unfortunate, my brother, to refer to a people's resistance, the movement, and say it's a domestic terrorist. He is a terrorist himself, not the other way around. But it's our struggle. It's us. We are connected. We are one people and made in God's image.
Yeah, it is indeed a common struggle. And one of the challenges that we are facing is people look at these incidences, such as what happened in Minneapolis, as well as, the genocide against the Mau Mau people. People look at these events from a historical perspective as if they are disconnected. It is important when we do the intersectional work that we are called to do, that we realize that these occurrences, these events, these genocidal events, rooted, in this heresy, this ideology and theology that white is better than black, that white is more supreme than black, that all of these are really connected. And so it's so important that we put it all into perspective, around what's been going on, whether it is, the support that the United States has given to the apartheid regime, as well as, the ongoing, imperialistic tentacles, that we see that continues to go on, even today, and the complicit, disposition, from so many, leaders, whether it's in Africa or elsewhere, around the subjugation, the oppression, and the marginalization, of their people is just sickening and downright immoral, and frankly unacceptable. In your poem, you do such a powerful job of bridging, what's the pain that's taking place or that has been taking place in the United States, starting with the Red Holocaust, with our, First Nations here, and then from there on to the Black Holocaust, right? And I did use the term Holocaust because that term is not exclusive to one group, that has experienced, pain and disaster, around that. So, how is it that we can continue to make this connection? Because we've had, uprisings in South Africa. We're coming up to June 16th when young people, really did in South Africa what young people are doing here, around that. And that's coming up this coming week. What's the bridge, that we can build from pain to possibility around what we see is happening in the United States, around the world, and of course in South Africa as well?
My comrade brother, Reverend Sauls, we serve a God of perfect timing. It just come to my mind that, by the way, we are on the eve of June 16, the South Student Uprising. The world needs to know that I am part of a group of creative producers. In fact, I'm the executive producer of what is coming up, the June 16 film. The world witnessed other things like, stage plays and stuff like that. We are working on something from 2014, something that has never been seen, something that has never been told, because this movie, the script is complete, everything is complete. It's just a matter of us securing up, enough resources to make sure that every corner of the globe should know what happened between 1976 to 1977. I want to be very specific that everybody remembers Sharpeville 1960. That is the figures is 69 people that were shot dead, 180 were injured, mostly shot at the back. But what I'm talking about, the June 16 scenario, that 700 people lost their lives, 700 between 1976 to 1977. It's 44 years later. There is no movie about June 16. justice has not been done. Now, the people who shot, the people who murdered the 700 people are still alive to this day. There has not been a justice. There was a TRC in South Africa, but the terms of reference, the June 16, call it massacre. It was like set aside. So you have people who went missing in action besides the 700 people that I'm talking about when they were fleeing the country after the slaughter of the school children. Imagine using R1, R4 to school children unarmed, the age from 13, 14, 15 years old. To this day, is 2020. A child of 13 years can never threaten your life. But this is a situation where a massacre took place in South Africa. And people don't know what happened until we release the movie. People are only for the past 43 years, they know Hector Peterson, Tietze Mashinini, Hector Peterson, Mbuli Mashinini. But, I'm talking about 700 people. You can imagine the families of those who've lost their loved ones, the hundreds. And for the past 43 years, people talk only about 3 names. Now, we are coming to come with something undistorted and diluted. The actual story, what exactly happened, you cannot just choreograph and jive and dance about the Holocaust. The Jews don't compromise. Even our issue now about racism with the Jews is very clear. It's anti-Semitism. So it's about time it becomes very clear. You said what needs to be done. It's not over until it is over. The victory will be declared at the end of the battle. So we are connected. We are one. As long as there is racism, it's clear. It's evidence. Watch television. See what is happening. It's continuing. It means this disease, this cancer has been there brewing like molecules before the bomb could explode. It has been happening everywhere. And I must remind people that in South Africa, racism was legal. Racism was legal. There were separate amenities, separate toilets. Even if you go to the beachfront, everything, it was legal. So where people should not be surprised when we find institutionalized racism. And apartheid system was a violent system. It was maintained violently. So I'm saying we are on the eve of people who are going to, their wounds will be reopened. It's not enough for people just to go and clean up the graves. Because in South Africa, what I've seen, there was a TRC. Nelson Mandela was given a report that 200 people were supposed to be prosecuted. To this day, from 1998 to 2020, not a single person was arrested or prosecuted. Stephen Bantu Biko. If you talk of people who died in detention, I hear the other day the president of South Africa talking about the death of George Floyd. It's similar to Stephen Bantu Biko. But in South Africa, 72 people were killed behind bars, killed in detention. And to this day, no one was arrested, no one was brought to book. So people's hearts, people out there hurting, there is no closure. So that is why it cannot be over. Hence, I'm saying we are one, we can identify, we connect. What is happening there is here. Although I normally say, if people will escape earthly justice, there is God's judgment.
Right.
So sins unconfessed are sins unforgiven. So we've got people who have went missing in action, and people know exactly what happened to mass graves, to people who have just been, who were massacred, who were killed during the period of different massacres. In South Africa, had lots of massacres. But as I say, June 16 is around the corner. Once again, people are going to commemorate under difficult conditions because this time it's locked down because of the coronavirus or COVID-19. So it's very sad. I'm trying to think exactly how is it that people are going to remember their loved ones, because it has always been a tradition for people to gather and pay respect and remember those who were maimed, killed mercilessly in school uniform by adults using automatic assault rifles.
Right. Yeah, so certainly, accountability is an integral part of who we are, as human beings, at least, as who we are as creation, around that. And when these, dates come around, such as, June 16th, of course, remembering has its place. But it seems as if, remembering, is the destination and not the point of departure. And so I'm wondering, how can we, add to remembering, resistance, ongoing resistance, because we still see in South Africa, especially without that, accountability that has taken place, the challenge, again, the ongoing resistance that need to take place. Hence, movements such as fees must fall, bridges must fall, because of the need for ongoing resistance due to the lack of accountability. And then also then the whole invitation to reimagination, around, how we can now reimagine, a South Africa that is characterized by social, and racial equity. The thing that's always important when we talk about apartheid is people only want to talk about it as a racial system, right? A system of racial oppression. But it was also a system of economic exploitation. I mean, apartheid was built on racial capitalism, right? And then that was then connected with this whole fallacy illusion of trickle-down economics, that in South Africa worked by way of, that was racialized in so many ways, by way of paternalism, as we look at it. And so we have just this combination of all of this stew that continues to brew right underneath. And it seems to me as if in South Africa, we're dealing with a government that really don't want to pay attention to that brewing stew, and we're dealing with a lot of white South Africans that continue to be in denial about the atrocities that took place and the privilege and the benefits, that people still experience, around that. So my question is, as we talk about solidarity and unity and intersectionality, what are the lessons that you think we can learn from what has happened in South Africa and what we've done about that, what we've done in the United States and what's happening now? What are some of those lessons that can move us towards unity and solidarity? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, let me just say, I'm glad you touched the issue of the wealth of the country or the imbalance. Mm-hmm. It's 26 years after democracy. The racism did not end in 1994. Inequality did not end in 1994. Mm-hmm. Poverty did not end in 1994. The wealth, the economy of the country. I think what the world needs to know is that in South Africa we achieved only political power or political freedom, not economic power. The economy of the country is still in white hands. Mm-hmm. It is unfortunate. It's still in white hands. So there's dire poverty. It's one country, two nations. Poverty in South Africa is color. The people need to know that. So the people cannot eat votes, and a vote does not translate into equality. So it's unfortunate. There's still a lot to be done. Hence, people use slogans as "not yet Uhuru" or "the struggle continues." Comrade, it is exactly like that. It's so sad to see even former freedom fighters who die paupers. People are hungry. People are, as before COVID-19 or lockdown, there was figures that 12 million people were unemployed, and you know exactly what color of those people am I talking about. So it is unfortunate that to this day, people are hungry. To this day, only a few people are controlling the economy of the country. So it means the struggle continues. We need to continue to, we need total emancipation. So people are not totally free economically. So as I'm saying, it's irony. It's so ironical that we live in a country where we don't own the resources, whether it's gold, diamond, all the resources. We live in Africa, somebody said it, but the resources belong elsewhere. So I was under the impression that when we attained our democracy in 1994, everything will belong to the people, because the saying was the people shall govern. But when it comes to economy of the country, it doesn't belong to the mass of God. Our people will fight for water. People don't have running water. The people it's tough especially during this lockdown where people live on handouts, what kind of a nation is it that we should rely on IMF and World Bank? And when we have almost all kinds of resources, I talk broadly, Africa as a continent has almost everything that we need. We don't even have to look elsewhere outside our own continent. But in South Africa in particular, given the fact that so much people paid a supreme price fighting for it's unfortunate. Now, when it comes to what you have seen, the whole world shook after the death of George Floyd. Why South Africans? Did you see them taking it to the streets in thousands? Did you see that? Let us be honest and be frank and free. I did not see what I saw in London and Paris, in America, happening in South Africa, where what was significant this time compared to the 1968 or during the Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement, it was mostly African American. But this time around, it's almost all racist.
Yeah,
so in South Africa, there is something wrong with the whites in this country that they do not take it to the streets. I could take you to a situation where touch something that is like an animal, they can take it to the streets. But when there are massacres, when some of our people are killed, you'll never see that kind of solidarity. We need solidarity. Perhaps what is happening now around the world could create a mind change, shift, perceptions could change. People can begin to say, not in our name, and hashtag racism must follow, something like that, because you can't keep quiet in silence. As I say, the winds of change are blowing, whether you like it or not, blue or brown, the winds of change are changing. This time, no one is prepared to tolerate racism. And in South Africa, fortunately, last Friday, the president of the country launched an anti-racism campaign. I want to believe there's always a starting point. A journey of 1,000 miles has started.
Absolutely, and you mentioned, we are aware of the fact that they did take some marches and protests, that in Cape Town, in Pretoria, and in Johannesburg. But you are right; it hasn't taken place at a massive scale as it has taken place elsewhere. And I think that's very, very important, for us, to realize that really our silence, in so many ways, can be very, very appalling. Our absence, can, in so many ways, signify acquiescence, to the violence of white supremacy that is taking place. And yes, I think, in South Africa, people thought after 1994 we were going to go straight into the promised land. Well, we got news for you. We are still in the wilderness and making our way there. In fact, I dare say that the United States is still in the wilderness. And with the new Pharaoh that's at 1600 Pennsylvania, Avenue, sometimes, we realize that, you can take people, out of Egypt, but you can't take Egypt out of people. Folk, as we make our way to the promised land, are still afflicted by Pharaohitis, and long for the slave pots, you see, of, Jim Crow, of, discrimination, and racism. And it's an ongoing struggle. Freedom is a constant struggle. One of my favorite books, by Angela Davis. So it invites us to see, how we have to really meet each other at the intersection. And I want to lift up, a couple of things, challenges, painful challenges, comparisons, if you will, of what happens at the intersection that really demands, a unity and solidarity. For instance, in South Los Angeles, where I reside and work, COVID-19 certainly has revealed the challenge of health inequity. That's the same thing, in South Africa. That is why COVID-19 has disproportionately, affected, African Americans. And it's the same thing in South Africa when I talk with, the folk in the medical sector over there. Food crisis, in South Los Angeles, we are dealing with a huge challenge of access to nutritional food because, COVID-19 has revealed the consequences of policies, that are rooted in systemic racism. And so the challenge of food equity, is a huge challenge for us. One can go on around unemployment and jobs. When you look at the numbers, you can see that's happening. For us in Los Angeles, the challenge with houselessness, in terms of the amount of people, living on the streets. That's a crisis right now. Los Angeles is the capital of homelessness or houselessness. That's the same thing that is happening in South Africa. Every time I go home and take some time to work with organizations in caring for those on the streets, it gets worse and worse. Just like the numbers continues to increase for us in the city and the county of Los Angeles. You can say the same thing about education, around that. And of course, what's happening around law enforcement, so there are all of these, challenging comparisons, that really pulls us into the intersection, pulls us into unity and solidarity, because in the end, make no mistake, we are dealing with the same enemy, whether it's in North America or whether it is in Southern Africa. And that is, as you mentioned, this barbaric, belief called racism that is rooted in white supremacy, that was exported, from Europe to so many places, around the world. As we come to a close, Mzwakhe, what, as a poet, this is the time when we need, artists, to really inspire us, to nurture our spirits. We here, as I do the work with Community Coalition, one of our, organizations here in South LA, we talk about artivism, where we really rely on the artists. And you certainly, for us, you are a voice, for the voiceless in so many ways. As an artist, what words do you have for us, in the United States as we, challenge, the police industrial complex, the prison industrial complex, and, words that you have, for us, who have family and friends in South Africa, around it. Any words that you have for us as we, move towards conclusion?
Yeah, I just have to say that we should never give up. I'm glad this is Faith Without Borders. We should be resilient like a Daniel against a King Nebuchadnezzar. For every Goliath, there is a David. We should exactly emulate the spirit that was in David facing a giant. We should be like the prophet Elisha who executed 400 prophets of Baal. We should be like Stephen, who was fearless, prepared to be stoned to death for the truth. We are the people who should confront a racism head on. We should make sure that they don't sleep peacefully, those perpetrators of evil. I said demons have no capacity to love. We are made in God's image. We should never allow any nation, any race to look down upon us. We are the same. Oxygen is the same. Blood is the same. We exist in the same planet. So no one is right. In fact, some people are settlers themselves, but they regard other people as immigrants. Yet they are settlers, because even those who committed genocides and transatlantic slave trade, they did not belong where they are. So they have no right to have a nerve to refer to other people as foreigners and immigrants. So I'm just saying we should walk very tall. We are made in God's image. We should not fear anyone. We must speak the truth. The Bible commands that failure to do what is right is sin before God. So it means we should be people who are given the spirit of power and sound mind and not be fearless. So for us, we should continue to hold hands and say an injury to one, an injury to one is an injury to all, and hold hands and continue the solidarity to one, love one another. We did struggle together in the past. We are still together now. We've got similarities, as you said, in the health sector, unemployment, homelessness. We are one. Look at the color of our skin. It's the same. We are one, made in God's image. I said, if we are made in God's image, we are therefore programmed to succeed.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. He is the people's poet, my comrade, my brother, Mzwakhe Mbuli. MZ, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's 30 minutes after midnight over there. Thanks for staying up with us, man, and just bringing us inspiration as well as, encouragement. Your words, of course, continue to remain resilient, continue to resist, continue to reimagine as we make our way towards the destination of equity, and of course, truth will lead the way. We have become here in the United States a nation infected with and affected by lies and deception from the highest office. And so you are right. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Thank you so much, my brother. Looking forward to connecting with you. Listen, we send out prayers to that project, and you need to let us know how we can be supportive, of that the project that really will tell the story around, the June 16 uprising, and how we can be supportive of that. Much love, and God bless.
Thank you very much.
All right, that was the People's Poet Mzwakhe Mbuli. That was just such an honor for me to connect with him and to just be inspired. It just took me back to when I was a teenager and using his words, his vocabulary, his lyrics, for direction and inspiration against the evil regime of apartheid, which was not just an ideology, but was also a theology, a very, very heretical and blasphemous theology. We just got to call it what it is. And that's the same thing, with the theology of white supremacy, heretical and blasphemous. And God would not want to have any part of that. So let us reclaim who we are and whose we are as we continue to press on and move forward. We continue here at Faith Without Borders. We are still in this pandemic called COVID-19, and it is important that we, make sure that we partner with one another to see how we can overcome this pandemic and conquer this pandemic. We're going to take a quick break with Angela Kidjo. She sings, a beautiful song that became world famous, by Miriam Makeba, called Pata Pata. And I know my mentor and friend Alvin Herring loves Pata Pata. And so she has taken, this song, and what she has done with it is to kind of do a COVID-19, spin to it, around it. And we're going to see if we can, cue that song up and play it for us, the one and only, one that, in my estimation, has become, Mama Africa, Angela Kidjo. Here she is with Pata Pata, and it is the COVID-19, version of it. We'll take a short break, and then after that, we're going to continue our conversation with Clergy for Black Lives. We'll be right back. This is Faith Without Borders. I'm your host, Pastor Calvin Sauls.
Keep your distance, please. Prove a long and dance with us, mama. Let's come together, sing this, papa. Pata pata means to touch and to feel, which we shouldn't do. Everybody can help fight COVID-19 by doing what we need to do. It's the time to sit it out. Stay at home and wait it out. This is what we gotta do, mama. This is what keep your distance, please. Groove along and dance with us, mama. Let's come together, sing this, papa. In this time of coronavirus, it's no touch time. The virus can be beaten by us, and soon the coast will be clear again.
Yeah, so just start call tomorrow's Media 1. You and Smart will be on the same time.
Okay, I'm trying to, so how do I, your meeting is ready, so how do I?
Welcome back to Faith Without Borders. I'm your host, Pastor Calvin Sauls. Glad you're with us. We are working on getting our next guest on. I think we may have Pastor Smart on, but we'll...
title of the song.
We're working on it. Anyway, Faith Without Borders, here we are. Our next segment is going to deal with something that took place this past week with 7 pastors coming together, 7 clergy coming together to launch what we are calling Clergy for Black Lives. And the opportunity with Clergy for Black Lives is to bring several clergy together because when we were at the memorial service for George Floyd this past Monday, there were several of us in our cars. I mean, we had almost over 2,000 cars that came, from, Long Beach, from South Los Angeles, as well as from the Valley, into, the San Fernando Valley, into downtown Los Angeles for a memorial service, as we not just commemorated the life of George Floyd, but also, the many who have died at the hands of law enforcement in the city and the county of Los Angeles. Over 600 individuals, mostly black men, but also, of course, several black women. And so that is why we are talking about hashtag defund police, and we will get into all of that, with these pastors. But what happened at that memorial was just very, very disturbing to many of us, who were there as clergy, as Dr. Melina Abdullah addressed the crowd. She mentioned, around the challenges that the Black Lives Movement, or the Movement for Black Lives, which is a broader umbrella of a movement, continue to have, with pastors in general, but in particular black pastors. And so we've had challenges around sexism, as well as homophobia, as well as, just the criticism around tactics. Several of us as pastors, clergy, we have moved towards what we call operational unity, as well as solidarity, with one another, as we seek to get to the same destination, which is racial and social equity. And so we gathered to reflect on, what happened on Monday and what we've heard, and decided to take a deliberate and decisive stand, with Black Lives Matter by launching what we call Clergy for Black Lives. I want to commend my colleagues, who've joined together with this, and we are working on getting 2 of them to join us. One is already on. I believe we may have Pastor Smart on. Oh, we have Pastor James on. There he is. Hey. The pastor professor is in the house. Lord have mercy. And I hope you heard what I said, and you can, of course, fill in if I've missed, anything. But I know Pastor, James, that's with us, James Thomas, that's with us. He is a pastor in the San Fernando Valley, but also a professor at California State University here in Los Angeles, where he's doing tremendous work, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's in the pulpit, or whether it's in the streets. Much respect and much love for him. We joined together with Pastor Q on a journey to the border, to the California-Mexico border, where we wanted to go down there and see what was going on with black migrants. And so that was the opportunity that we had on that long bus ride down there to reconnect and catch up with each other. But where the action is for the dismantling of white supremacy and the declaration of the destination of racial and social equity, he's going to be there. And I'm glad that he's my friend and my brother and my comrade. So good to have you with us. How you doing? Okay, do we still have him, or did we lose him?
No, I have.
Okay.
I hear you.
All right, so
yeah,
I'm so glad you're able to join. We're going to try and work on getting Pastor Smart on. But let's talk a little bit about why clergy for Black lives and why now.
Okay, I hear you now. You're back on.
Okay, did you hear me, Pastor James? I was asking why clergy for Black lives and why clergy for Black lives now?
Well, I've always been clergy for Black lives, but I think the reason that I think we needed to be a little bit more formalized is that, people are confused, particularly, young Black folks. They're trying to understand why it is that clergy doesn't appear to be in step with the community, or why they're not out in the street as they are, and why the message seems to be a bit different. And let me just explain that. No one is arguing that clergy doesn't support Black lives. I don't think that anyone would, especially Black clergy, would be able to make that point. But the issue is, does clergy support Black Lives Matter as a movement? And the problem, and so that is in many cases, some don't publicly. I mean, many support privately, but don't show their support publicly, which gives the impression that they don't support. So one of the things that we wanted to do is we want for folks to know that there are clergy people who understand the mission of Black Lives Matter, put forward the mission, believe in the mission, and actually, myself, one of them, I've been a member for Black Lives Matter for a long time, and my membership and my involvement has to do with, I'm also, my background is in public policy, and they're dead on. And so when I look at the work of Black Lives Matter, I look at it from, three tiers. There is the community component. There is the activism and the action. But there is like the highly skilled, public policy public policy analysis and research that goes into making this organization or this movement as effective as it has been. And I find it very difficult to understand why anyone would not support Black Lives Matter. I mean, look at how far the organization has got us in this fight for freedom and liberation for Black people. This is not, this is a fight for freedom and liberation. This is not for Black people. This is not just a civil rights battle. It's deeper than that. And so we wanted to come out and show our strong support for the organization. There are other pastors who want to show their support as well. This is an opportunity for pastors to work with the community in ways that they hadn't done before. Most pastors are kind of insular. I think that's Reverend Smart that has joined. Most pastors are insular, and they work with, people within their church or within their Christian community, with their faith tradition. But often, they don't work across. Sometimes they don't work across denominations, and sometimes they don't work, across different faith traditions, and certainly they don't work often with those who are antagonistic or just don't celebrate their faith. That's a long answer, but I want to say there's one situation that kind of summed it up for me. I was talking to a young man who was very excited about getting involved in the movement, and full disclosure, I always say, I'm a pastor and that kind of thing, and so he says, well, I'm not religious. And so I said to him, and I'm not trying to recruit you. We're having a conversation. And so that took him completely off guard. And, he has called me, he's contacted me. We've still been in touch. We're going to get in touch. I'm sure we're going to grow closer, but I'm just saying that's an example of something that you would never think to respond that way typically, because most people think that whenever you're engaging a pastor, that pastor is trying to proselytize you in some way. Now, I will be very honest. I want everybody to be a Christian. I wouldn't be a Christian pastor if I didn't, but I know and I respect, other people's choices. And I know that we can work together with the same goals in mind and get this work done, because there's not a lot of folks in any faith tradition that's just, fighting to do, this work. If there's not a crowd of people in any faith tradition that is overwhelmingly signing up, to do this work. And so that's just my feeling. Reverend Smart, I don't know if you heard the question.
Pastor Smart, are you there, Pastor Smart?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. This is a busy day. What's the question?
I know. You're in the middle of the graduation of your son. Congratulations. You're looking all fine and dapper there, Pastor Smart, as always.
That's always.
The question.
He don't need an excuse to dress up. He doesn't need an excuse to dress up. I do, though.
The question was, why clergy for Black lives and why now? Your thoughts?
First of all, the seven of us that have come together, we're clergy that have always been involved with the Black Lives Movement in some capacity, dating back to whether praying at their meetings, standing out there when they occupied City Hall. We've just been there and we clearly understood. And once before, about 3 years ago, we had a matter came up where we had to address the importance of the prophetic tradition being involved. I'm involved because it's a natural thing. I'm involved also historically because SCLC and SNCC, if you're going back, I look at the Black Lives Matter movement a lot like the early SNCC movement. And I think SCLC made some fundamental mistakes then. Differences then. King and them were more, who's my mentor, they were more person-centered, whereas Black Lives and SNCC tend to be more group-centered leadership. And that's important to me in this day and time, that leadership isn't centered around one person. I think we can lead other clergy and help them to understand the movement and just get involved in our prophetic traditions. I think it's very serious that what is what's happening in America today. And this is, I'm going to use something that is going to come out, but this is the first show to say it on, that my theory that this is the great reckoning, Pastor Sauls, and that means that for 401 years, America has treated black folks a certain way, and we've never gotten the cash out. We've never gotten the check that has been due us. But now it's the great reckoning, and the great reckoning is coming when someone pays what is due. America has something that is due us, and we are going, and ever since the time we got off the slave ships, ever since the time that our women were separated from their kids at an early age, and then later on they had the police or they had the vigilantes searching after runaway slaves, the Jim Crow racism, all of this, every job we've been denied, every education opportunity that we have been held against us. Every time we made one step and they increased the ceiling over our heads, so we have to climb higher. It's the great reckoning now. What we see in the streets right now, Pastor Sauls and Pastor James, is a great reckoning. That is, we are coming. People, the world is coming to say the black man in the world has been done wrong. And what has happened to George Floyd is that camel that is the straw that broke the camel's back. Brother James, it is the sip of coffee that spilled over the coffee cup, and it is the raindrop fall that burst open the dam. It's the great reckoning. We're going to see a lot going on as we recapitulate and recalibrate. And African Americans, and you talking about, we won't need, after the great reckoning, we won't need any reparations because we will have it. We're going to get into colleges. Colleges will be free to us. You talk about there won't be any need for affirmative action because every job we've been denied, we're going to get. It's time for the great reckoning. That's what we see happening, and I'm glad to be a part of it. And if other pastors, other clergy don't see what's going on, we'll try to teach them, show them, lead them. If they don't see it, we'll move on without them. It's the great reckoning.
Indeed.
All
indeed.
I can say is amen, brother, amen.
Well, I tell you, when we were together on Wednesday, talking through this and doing some discernment and discussion, it was so inspirational and so powerful. And I'm certainly glad to be part of, Clergy for Black Lives, because what it really invites us in is to really make a decision. Are we going to be, chaplains, to the empire, or are we going to be prophets, for the resistance movement? And that is why we are talking about the shift that's happening. It's a great shift that's happening. A great adaptation. Some call it. Pastor Smart calls it, of course, the great reckoning. Around inviting us into intersectionality. That's why we're saying all Black Lives Matter, right? And then also to see, how it is that we can once again, pledge, operational unity as we march on towards the, obliteration of, white supremacy. And we do that by way of being in solidarity and in support with one another as we come from, different spaces and places, speaking different languages, on our way to the destination that we have. Let's, I know, Pastor Smiles, you got to go. Let's talk a little bit.
One of the things, I forgot to mention that one of the things that comes out of the Great Reckoning is a beloved community.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
absolutely.
Thank you for allowing me in this space on this busy day for us and my family.
Absolutely.
God bless you, brother.
Yeah, man. So quickly, but I know you got to go in a few minutes. Pastor James and I will get into the goals, and the vision of Clergy for Black Lives in a minute. But say a little bit about just the importance of placing ourselves at the intersection, right? And at that intersection, how do we, lift up unity in diversity and practice, if you will, solidarity and support as we march towards, this whole, destination called the beloved community. Let me quickly just say, you and I always have a conversation about the so-called
Yes,
"I Have
sir.
a Dream" speech, and
Yeah.
that speech has been so edited and watered down, where people just want to go on as if the civil rights, human rights movement was only about race. It was also about economics. That's why, Dr. King talked about the check. And a lot of folks don't want to talk about the check, right? And about the
Yeah.
economic equity that we need. But just quickly, your thoughts,
Okay.
around.
My thoughts is, first of all, we talk about the goal. We talk for the intersectionality. We make sure we don't think we have the answer. We listen to others. We share. We move on what we are inspired to move, while others move on what they inspired to move on, and we develop those lines of commonality and say, we can agree on this. Let's move in this direction. We see this. Let's work on this project together. The other day I talked to someone about the black and brown issues, and I just said, let's just work on what we have in common. And sometimes we got to do that with other clergy because we have a lot in common. And move from there, and then build an understanding. But no, we don't have all the answers. But you're just a group of women and men that I'm excited about working with, because I've been working with you a long time, and I've been working with a lot of pastors a long time in this city on many projects. It's pulling us all together around commonality.
Absolutely.
Thank you, my brothers.
Yes.
God bless.
Thanks. Hey, again, good. Congratulations on your son's graduation. Y'all have a great time,
absolutely.
man.
Thank you, Brother James.
And
You're
so
headed
wherever
this way.
he goes,
Are you in the valley, or you headed this way?
I'm in the valley, but I am going to be headed. I forgot I got to preach at 5:00.
Oh,
but I'm
Lord.
You can't do it.
Yeah, I forgot.
Okay.
I got to preach at 5:00, but I'm going to go to the BLM meeting tonight. But
Okay.
tell your son wherever he goes, tell him he can pledge any fraternity he wants. But if he don't pledge Kappa, he's gonna have to get another father.
I can't believe that. I can't believe. Hey. I can't believe that y'all hijacking my show to talk about fraternities and recruiting folk. Lord, I plead the blood over both of y'all.
It's red, ain't it?
It's red.
Red,
No. Oh, come on, man. Oh, man. Yeah, we certainly celebrate the graduation of that young man. He's the representation of what he's, excellent about blackness, and we celebrate Little Smart there. And we know that he has lived up to that last name in terms of that. Let's continue our conversation, just around the 4 or 5 pieces that we talked about and came and built some consensus around. Pastor James, if you would just let's go to them, through them one by one. Briefly, and lift them up, and then just say a little bit about it, so that those who are out there, some clergy who would want to be a part of this, we know they are rabbis for Black Lives, and so many, other clergy, and we'll connect, with them. But we wanted to make sure that as Black clergy, that we, take the lead on this, because in the end, it is about our people. And we want to make sure it's centered where it needs to be centered, around, the movement of for Black Lives, around that.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because the centering piece is pivotal. This is about Black people. This is, and it's very, very important that we be unapologetically about that. This is not to the exclusion of anybody, but this is about Black people. This particular moment is about Black people. And I say that because this is the first time that we have been able to be unapologetic about who we are. We have always had to filter, our dissent, even our dissent, our messaging, our public philosophical views, our theology, it's all had to be filtered so as not to offend white fragility.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's you know, and that's just a fact. You know, all of us, if you are black in this country, you have been told by another black person that you respected and that respected you. You can't say that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's true, but you can't say that.
Right.
You know, we've all been told that. That's true, but you can't say that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, well, we're not censoring ourselves anymore. And so that's what this is about. And I've long believed that I cannot expect to really be in solidarity with you or expect you to be in solidarity with me if you don't know me.
Yeah.
And so I need to speak to you as if you were sitting around my dining room table at my house. The kinds of conversations that we have. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm a firm believer that when the scripture says you have aught against your brother, go to him and be reconciled. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the day, that's what this is. We're just unfettered. You know, our first, the first point mm-hmm. or objective or philosophy, however we want to couch this, is, you know, we unapologetically support the movement for Black lives and we fight for Black liberation and freedom. We are not fighting for civil rights.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Fighting for liberation.
Right.
We're fighting to be free. We got some civil rights, mm-hmm. but we're still we're still not free. Mm-hmm. And so we want something beyond that.
Yeah.
And so that is, we want to control our own destiny. Mm-hmm. That's what it really is about.
Yeah,
and
I think it's good that you distinguish, you know, between, you know, civil rights, liberation, and freedom. You know, say a little bit more about that, because I think we really want to, you know, to have forget this destination called liberation and freedom, and not just civil rights. Mm-hmm.
Right, because civil rights has been defined for us. Mm-hmm. Liberation is what we will define. You know, in other words, it's the life that we will live. It will be our definition of freedom. You know, it is amazing that, you know, that a segment of people who historically has been so responsible for creating and inventing things that made the world a much better place. They've done that kind of in the cover of night. You know, that they've never been celebrated for doing that. That's never been something that's been encouraged. In other words, people have made these phenomenal inventions and discoveries in spite of, not because of. What if we supported the work of Black people because of what they're capable of, as opposed to us succeeding in spite of what folks think and feel about us and how they treat us? And so liberation is, you know, liberation and freedom is us deciding as Black people that we're not going to be fettered, you know, that we want to be able to explore the full extent of our ability and our ingenuity. Mm-hmm. You know, and we want to employ that not just for our benefit, especially for our benefit, but not just for our benefit, but for the entire world. Mm-hmm. And I think the world becomes a better place. You know, all the time I sat in seminary and I heard all of the, you know, all of the theology that was introduced, you know, it was all coming from Europeans. I mean, Europe is like the hotbed of theology in most seminaries. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget the time when I was sitting in class and I just thought to myself, okay, we've heard from everybody else. When will we hear the theology or the theological perspective from the enslaved? Mm-hmm. What role and responsibility do Black people have in the development of the kingdom of God? Mm-hmm. You know, what is our contribution? And so now we know that there are some historical contributions and context that no one ever wants to talk about. Right. But I'm saying from a contemporary standpoint, you know, this, for all we know, this world, as soon as black folks receive liberation and freedom, that may just be what the beloved community is. That may be all it takes.
Yeah.
As it relates to the beloved community. So that's our first. That's kind of our first point.
What goes with that first one, of course, where we talk about the movement for Black Lives, we have to also understand, of course, that it is a movement that has multiple leaders, right? That was kind of, Ella Baker's vision. Multiple leaders, multiple women leaders, right? Multiple women leaders from the LGBTQI community. And I think that's, we want to affirm that. We want to celebrate that. And we want to lift that up, as part of, Clergy for Black Lives, as we move forward.
And this is
that in itself is liberative. That
is a difficult thing, and for many, that's a conversation that ends the conversation. At the end of the day, what is important is we're all human beings. Mm-hmm. And no one should be treated less than human. Mm-hmm. And so it's difficult for me to argue that black folks shouldn't be treated less than human and then allow other folks to be treated less than human. And so, I think that, people, that has probably been the biggest critique as to why, some pastors and some Christians don't want to be a part of Black Lives Matter. Right. Because, it's so funny because I talked with a friend of mine who's a pastor the other day, and I was just sharing with him, asking him would he be interested in being a part of the group. He said, yes. And so I was very upfront with him. I said, so these are the points. And he said, well, that has nothing to do with what we're trying to do. And I said, you get it. You don't have to change your theology or what you believe. And, you can still be you. But at the end of the day, we're working towards freedom, and we need to employ everybody.
Right. Absolutely.
We need to put everybody, and so we can't afford to exclude people. I mean, there was another group of folks who, we talk about, people lift up LGBT, as a group. But there's also like these some guys that came to our event, and they were former or current folks that were gang affiliated. Mm-hmm. As if they're not our people too.
Right.
Right. There are.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about accepting all of our people, regardless to whether or not. We're not dividing up based upon what people do.
Right.
This is not an elitist crowd. Yeah. This is not the religious elite. This is about people who are sick and tired of being sick and tired, and they're willing to lay their differences aside to work towards our freedom.
Absolutely.
That's what this is about.
And
anybody who can. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm going to ask Felicia to look for that image that talks about, all lives matter, so people can just realize even those who are differently able. Some still call them disabled, but I call them differently able. Just to realize, that it is about, all black lives. Let me read the second point, Pastor, and then we'll talk about it. We believe that God is on the side of the oppressed and calls us to dismantle white supremacy and all of its systems that oppress black lives. Some thoughts about that one?
That's very powerful because we have to understand, the white supremacy, and there, a colleague of mine, he talks about this. He is an adherent to African spirituality, and he talks about white supremacy as a demonic spirit that we need to be delivered from, that needs to be exorcised from us. And that is the way it functions. It is a part of every single institution and every single in every single individual on this planet. Now, we may not recognize it as white supremacy. We may not know that it's white supremacy, but it is. You know, it is a major, major component of what it means to be human today. And we have to get rid of that. And it's very, very difficult because one of the assumptions that we believe is that we believe that, we can. One of the assumptions is that you cannot have a black institution that practices white supremacy. That you cannot be a black person and be an adherent to white supremacy.
Right.
You know, and that of course is not true. And so what we're saying is that wherever white supremacy exists, there's also systematic oppression happening, and it is our responsibility to dismantle those systems.
And that's and those systems exist even within denominations, especially our mainline denominations. That was used, as what I call WASP theology, or hotbeds for WASP theology that sought to justify, or build or create, develop, deploy a theology, around white supremacy, around that, right?
And that's the real dilemma, one of the things, I did a presentation on called Sankofa Christianity, and so I kind of argue that Christianity is a African religion. I don't understand why it's not, because Jesus Christ was African. He was of African descent, period. And I think we need to stop pretending that that's not the case. We need to stop pretending that Jesus Christ was anything other than African. He was. And that's just the bottom line, and that is an example, for those of us who would say, well, it doesn't matter that he was African. No, well, then why hide it? If it doesn't matter, why hide it? But it feeds into white supremacy, and so we have to dismantle even those images of this Caucasian Jesus that is just not historically accurate at all. Yeah. And we got to eliminate this whole, image of this Jesus who, well, maybe he wasn't quite white. He was brownish. I mean, we need to stop that.
Brownish.
He was brownish. And I heard this from one of the leading evangelicals in the country. Yeah. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it's just crazy and makes absolutely no sense. We know that institutional racism, of course, results in internalized racism, and that's why we still have a lot of pictures of white Jesuses in black churches. So that's why that liberation that still needs to take place, around that. Let me read the third one, and then we'll keep going here, Pastor. Third one: we commit to deploy spirituality to establish a moral fusion politic that will actualize social, economic, and racial equity. Some thoughts on that one?
We are not political. It's so funny. It is so funny because people are like, are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican? Who are you voting for? It's like, quite frankly, I don't like any of them. Personally, I don't. But the reality is that this is that we have to. This is the system that we've been handed, and so This has nothing to do with trying to be political. This has nothing to do with trying to gain any kind of political power, trying to gain any kind of influence. This is a spiritual. Somebody has to stand up and confirm and affirm that what is happening in the street is a move of God. It is a paradigm shift. And so that's what this is about. It has nothing to do with, politics and who are you voting for, or who are you endorsing, and any of those things, because at the end of the day, whether you're Democrat or Republican, all of this has been occurring under your watch.
Right. Yeah. So
this is it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. This whole piece about trying to, people talking about, not being political. Life is political. I mean, when I grew up in
Right,
South Africa,
exactly.
where I lived was political. Where I went to school was
Right.
political. Where I
Right.
bought my food was political. Where I played was political. Politics is life. And if your spirituality doesn't speak to the politics that's happening, I think King said something about that it is spiritually moribund and awaits its day to die, right? So any spirituality that doesn't want to deal with the everyday, policies, that degrade the lives of black people is simply an exercise in futility, as far as I'm concerned.
He said any religion that claims to be concerned about the souls of men, but not the slums that damn them or the economic conditions that entrap them is as dry as dust. And so at the end of the day, is that I look at it like this. Either I can go to the jail and pray with members of my church who have been wrongfully incarcerated, or I can push for an end of wrongful incarceration. And so that's what it comes down to. I'm going to get there anyway. I'm going to be involved anyway.
Yeah.
But this way, I'm choosing a higher level of involvement than I may have before.
Yeah.
And so I'm being strategic about my involvement. And so that's why it's important to understand, and I make the point about, because people want to say, oh, they're political ministers. They're just political. They're not, as if, we don't, believe the word of God and, they're just political. It's all that political pastoral. Oh, they just talk about politics all the time. Not understanding that, as you said, politics rule our life. It tells us what time our workday will start. Who says that morning? So, who says that morning? What time morning is? Who says that morning is when the sun comes up?
Right.
So all of these things have been predetermined, and these are all policy decisions which flow from politics. Yeah. You have politics, and then you have the implementation of those politics, which become policy. And so it tells us how much what our wage is going to be.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's every aspect of our life, and we have to.
Yeah, it sets minimum wage. We try to get the living wage, but it still sets minimum wage. Around that. We need to get people to read Aubrey Hendricks' The Politics of Jesus. So we can kind of just settle that the whole piece. Number 4, we commit to developing spiritual capital, which is defined as the individual and collective capacities generated through affirming and nurturing the intrinsic spiritual value of every human being. Your thoughts on that one?
Unless we allow the spirituality that is in all of us, just by being created in the image of God, unless we allow that to flourish, we will never get to the beloved community.
Yeah.
And so in order for us to get there, the only way that we can do that is, we have to start building the kind of capital that allows us to do that. And so our spirituality has to be such that we're not so easily offended by somebody thinking differently. That we understand that ultimately our spirituality leads us. I mean, there is something, when you talk about liberation, I don't know if there is a higher spiritual value than freedom. That's why God gave us freedom to choose.
Right. Yeah.
Freedom. There's not a higher value than that.
Yeah.
And so there's a way in which dominant groups want to force us to choose as they do, and when we don't, they alienate us.
Right.
And so developing spiritual capital is the mechanism where we understand that this has room, and most of the literature on spiritual capital has to do with, interestingly enough, has to do with businesses.
Yeah.
It hasn't really factored into the church. I mean, isn't that weird?
Yeah.
That businesses understand that we can't be effective businesses, that we are not maximizing, our capacity unless we have people who understand specific values and the importance of working as a collective. Businesses get it and we don't, and we're the church.
Yeah, and you're right. You're right about that. I mean, the key challenge we as people of faith can provide to racial capitalism is spiritual capital, because the spirit of racial capitalism is alive and well in the exploitation, marginalization, and oppression, of black people, not just in the United States, but all over the world, around that. So I'm excited about this fourth one and looking forward to, to us continuing to grow into that one, because in the end, it brings together, the rights that we are fighting, the humanity we seek to reclaim, but also that this is in the end about economics, and it is about capital as we move forward. The fifth,
because. Okay, go ahead. Go on. I was going to add this one point with the fourth one, because one of the things that Max Weber says when he in his book The Spirit of Capitalism, he says you cannot have capitalism unless there is a spiritual component to it. Mm-hmm. And so what he argues is that people don't work simply to get the check. That's not the best worker. The best worker or the best company is a company that is purpose-driven, that is adhering to a much higher level of calling. If you feel like you're called to a particular profession, then you're going to manifest that in the way that you work in that profession. And so that's one of the things that's the point that Max Weber. And so the point is that if we all understood that whatever our stations in life or whatever we want to commit to doing, that we're called to that, and we started adhering to these higher values, then you wouldn't have, if police thought that they were called and knew that they were called by God to be a police officer, then they wouldn't be so quick to violate
the humanity.
What his expectation, they really would, or one would think that they wouldn't. Yeah. One would think that they wouldn't. Mm-hmm. So anyway, you can go to number 5.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I know we're going to talk some more about this. Number 5, our tactics will include nonviolent direct action, and our advocacy will utilize any peaceful means necessary to eradicate racism, sexism, bigotry, homophobia, and misogyny, all of which have become normative in America. Thoughts on that one?
We're just out of control.
Yeah.
I don't know. We're just out of control. If there was ever a time, it's so funny because you look, especially in Christian circles, when you listen to the music and it's easy for Christians to say and for pastors to say, this world is just out of control. This world is just out of control. Look at what they're doing, and look at how they're dressing, and look at how they're acting, and marijuana is legal now, and oh my God, the world is just going to hell in a handbasket. Oh God, Christ, you got to come back quick, because look at what's going on in the world. Well, and never realizing that in as much as these things are happening, the love and the compassion that we should have for humanity is waning also. And so which is worse? Is it worse to be a believer who is a bigot, who doesn't have the capacity to treat people equally, but I'm a Christian? Or is it worse to have somebody who is, addicted to drugs or addicted to alcohol? Because, those are the things that people bring up. Well, I think if we're going to compare sins like that, I think, the scripture talks about, those sins that we are aware of, they're sins to us. And so if he says that they will know that we are Christians by our love, then why do we keep trying to implement and celebrate and broadcast our rules?
Mm-hmm.
Why do we do that? I don't think that there's a person on the planet that needs somebody to tell them that they've sinned. I think we know it. Mm-hmm. Now maybe I'm wrong. I just think we know when we've done something that was wrong, for the most part. Yeah. If we have but I think for the most part, we know if we tell a lie, we know we lied. We know that was not the truth. But we've spent the lion's share of our time doing those things and not exhibiting love.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the things that we know to be true, once you develop a relationship with somebody, they don't typically want to disappoint you.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like your kids. Your kids, will often say, well, I didn't do, I just disappointed you, or I didn't want to disappoint you. They're not saying, I knew you were going to spank me. And so, yes, spanking may be a way to get you to discipline you, but it's a false way.
Mm-hmm.
It's what is more impactful and more long-standing is if I say in my heart, because of my love for this person, I don't want to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that this is a very, very crucial problem for the church, because especially with the folks that are out in the street and the people that are looting and all those things that have happened, there's this tendency for ministers to say, you need to do this the right way. We're going to do this the right way. Well, how is it that you're doing it the right way simply because you're being friendly with police and elected officials? Mm-hmm. No, that doesn't mean you're doing it the right way. That means you're doing it the safe way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You're doing it the safe way, not necessarily the right way, because the right way would be engaging the people in the streets so that they know to trust you, loving on the people in the streets so they know that they can trust you. I said this in my sermon today, pastors can't even tell their own members what to do. So how are you going to tell folks who are not a member of your church, don't know who you are, but just because you wear a collar, you're supposed to be able to go out in the street and say stop when they're enraged, when they have been personally injured by all.
Yeah.
And so it just, it really challenges. I think the Black Lives Matter movement, I said this before, it challenges our definition of justice and righteousness.
Yes.
I think it really does.
Yeah.
I don't think we can be righteous without being just.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as you said, and we said, the presentation and speech that Future gave, at the memorial service was just so powerful, inviting us, into a new way of reimagining what it means to be in movement, in solidarity, in unity with one another at the intersection. We have to wrap up here. Part of the end of it says, our aim is to work to ensure that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s concept of a beloved community, which is the practical manifestation of the kingdom of God, is fully manifested. That's in the end what it's about. And again, I always refer, Pastor James, to the last chapter, of Dr. King's last book, which was entitled, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community. Mm-hmm. That last chapter is about God's beloved world house. This is what makes this a global movement. And so, as a black immigrant, that was born and raised in South Africa, where we've experienced, our share of the evil of white supremacy. This is about, the beloved community in the United States, but it's also about God's beloved world house, because we are all inextricably connected in all of this, as Dr. King says in writing that, a letter from a Birmingham jail, that, injustice, anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Or as Mzwakhe and Mbuli put it at the top of the show, an injury to one is an injury to all. Do you have some closing comments? And then I'll move us to the sending forth, as we say in the church. Any closing comments?
Well, one, thank you for having me on. I am so excited to be working with you fantastic brothers. I feel so blessed, and sisters. I feel so blessed. Yeah. I will say this. I think there's a revolution going on as it relates to these women. I mean, these women are leading like never before, and I'm so proud of them. And I'm just pushing them ahead. I thank God for the difference that they're making today, and I thank God for the progress that we're making as a people. And I just wanted to say, again, I could not be situated with a better group of folks fighting for liberty. For a long time, I thought I was out there on the island by myself. But I see, like the Bible says, God has other prophets. You ain't the only one. And so I thank God for you all. I mean, we can finish each other's sentences. We are right on point.
Yes.
It's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I look forward to many, many, many years of work of our working together. And that's, and I think you did make this point, and it is certainly important. But we, as you said at the top of the show, we've been to the border. We've seen what's going on at the border, and much of what this work is about in terms of what we do is we go to the source. And once you see the source, once you look into the eyes of these parents who've lost their kids unjustifiably because the police have killed them. Mm-hmm. Once you go to the border and you see that, unlike what our president, y'all's president, or somebody's president said, that these are a bunch of rapists and drug dealers and criminals, when you see that there are women that are like 8 months pregnant walking around their children and teenagers that look just like your own, that act just like your own, you're never the same. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I can't, you're never the same when you experience this firsthand. Yeah. When you talk to these folks firsthand, you're never the same, and you are compelled by God to do something. And so I'm just so glad to be a part of this, and and I look forward to many, many years of our working together.
Absolutely. I mean, you're right. It invites us into the intersection because the surveillance on the border is now the surveillance in the urban areas and the black communities. The militarization of the border is the militarization of police departments. Cages, at the border, cages in LA County. I mean, all of these things kind of work hand in hand. And I've always said, U.S. domestic policy towards communities of color is exactly the same as U.S. foreign policy towards countries of color because of intersectionality, and that's why we got to move, towards unity and solidarity. I want to just lift up the pastors, the 7 pastors that came together. It is, of course, you, Pastor James Thomas. It is Pastor, William Smart, Pastor Calvin Sauls. It is Pastor Tembalika Smart. It is Pastor Najuma, Pollard Smith, or Smith Pollard. It is Pastor Q. It is Pastor Eddie Anderson. And let's see, did I get everybody else? Yes.
Well, Stanley hasn't been on yet, but Stanley Talbot, he wants to be a part.
Stanley Talbot. All right. So that's who we are, and the leadership, is all of us, and we're glad, to undergird and uplift the leadership of the movement for Black Lives, which is a national and global movement that's going on, and of course lifting up, our folk, here, in Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, as they do the work that they are doing. So it is in the end about solidarity at the intersection, unity at the intersection that moves us towards our collective liberation and freedom. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been Faith Without Borders. I'm your host, Pastor Calvin Sauls. I want to thank all of our guests today. Again, as always, thought-provoking conversation with, that's very solutionary, as we move together, to facilitate, our collective liberation around the world, in a global way as we move forward. We want to let you know that we will be launching our website pretty soon, and that website is www.faithwithoutborders.love. Looking forward to populating that with what we are doing and who we are. And I want to give a shout out to Felicia here at Morris Media Studios for her commitment to the work that we are doing, here. That's where we're emanating from, straight out of Lamert Park in South Los Angeles. Thank you so much. Blessings.
God bless.
Sometimes you just can't believe the things your eyes see. So much injustice in this life, and it's happening right on your TV screen. So you drop to your knees and you're praying, cause you can hear him saying he can't breathe. And it's all so over